Imagine waking up one day to discover that most people around you no longer question anything. That the world has become so loud, so fast, and so saturated with information that the human mind, once a powerful tool for inquiry, discernment, and growth, has dulled into passive acceptance. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, disguised as convenience, entertainment, and connection. Yet beneath these modern comforts lies a troubling reality. Our collective capacity for deep thought is eroding, replaced by knee-jerk reactions and borrowed opinions. What happens when a society abandons critical thinking? When reason and reflection give way to emotional impulses and algorithmic suggestions? The consequences extend far beyond intellectual decline. They reshape our relationships, our institutions, and ultimately, our freedom. This is not merely an academic concern, but an urgent call to reclaim our most human capacity. The ability to think clearly in a world designed to cloud our judgment. The disappearance of critical thinking represents one of the greatest unacknowledged crises of our time. While we celebrate technological advancement and information access, we've overlooked how these same forces can undermine our cognitive independence. The philosopher Hannah Arendt warned that thoughtlessness, the heedless recklessness, or hopeless confusion or complacent repetition of truths which have become trivial and empty, creates the perfect conditions for manipulation and control. In this exploration, we'll uncover not just how critical thinking is vanishing, but why it matters so profoundly for our individual and collective future. We'll examine the forces working against thoughtful engagement, from information overload to social conformity. Most importantly, we'll discover practical ways to strengthen our mental sovereignty. In an age that discourages it, the journey ahead may challenge your assumptions and disrupt comfortable certainties. It may reveal uncomfortable truths about how easily influenced we all are. But it also offers something invaluable, a path toward intellectual freedom and authentic understanding in a world that often settles for less. Are you ready to think differently about thinking itself? Thinking is hard work, perhaps the hardest work we do. And in today's accelerated world, it's becoming increasingly rare. Our environment doesn't reward contemplation, it rewards speed, emotional intensity, and conformity. This shift didn't happen by accident. From educational systems that prioritize standardized answers over exploratory questions, to media ecosystems that favor engagement over enlightenment, multiple forces have converged to discourage deep thought. The philosopher Noam Chomsky identified this pattern decades ago in his analysis of propaganda and consent manufacturing. He observed how power structures depend on populations trained to consume information without questioning its premises, people who agree without understanding and react without reflecting. When critical thinking diminishes, governance becomes simpler, but democracy weakens. Consider how we interact with information today. We skim rather than read, share before verifying, and form opinions based on headlines rather than substance. We've developed what media theorist Nicholas Carr calls the shallows, a cognitive style characterized by scattered attention and superficial processing. Our neural pathways are literally being rewired by digital environments designed to capture attention rather than deepen understanding. According to neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, the average person now processes approximately 74 gigabytes of information daily, 5 times more than just a few decades ago. This cognitive overload triggers survival mechanisms in our brains. When overwhelmed, we default to mental shortcuts, cognitive biases, and group consensus rather than independent analysis. We look for social proof, the validation of others, to determine what deserves our attention and belief. Think about how often you've seen a post with thousands of likes and assumed its importance or accuracy. That's not reasoned evaluation, it's psychological shortcutting. And it's precisely why misinformation spreads so efficiently, not because people lack intelligence, but because they're operating in an environment that makes thoughtful discrimination nearly impossible. The decline of reading compounds this problem. Neuroscientist Marianne Wolf has documented how digital reading patterns are transforming our cognitive processes. We increasingly struggle with sustained attention to complex texts, the very skill that builds analytical capacity. Critical thinking requires mental endurance, the ability to hold multiple ideas in tension while examining their relationships and implications. This capacity atrophies when our attention constantly fractures. When did you last read something challenging without checking your phone? When did you last sit with a difficult concept until you genuinely understood it, rather than settling for a simplified version? These habits, once common among educated people, are becoming exceptional. The late astronomer Carl Sagan presciently warned, "We've arranged a global civilization in which the most crucial elements profoundly depend on science and technology. We have also arranged things so that almost no one understands science and technology. This is a prescription for disaster. His concern wasn't merely about scientific literacy, but about the capacity to think critically, about the systems governing our lives. But the problem extends beyond information processing. Critical thinking is emotionally demanding. It requires confronting uncertainty, acknowledging ignorance, and questioning cherished beliefs. In a culture that rewards certainty and tribal affiliation, the discomfort of intellectual humility becomes increasingly difficult to bear. We prefer the comfort of conviction to the anxiety of ambiguity. So instead of thinking, we defend. Instead of exploring, we entrench. We retreat into ideological bubbles where our views are constantly reinforced. We memorize talking points, rather than engaging in genuine dialogue. We've replaced Socratic questioning with social signaling, wisdom-seeking with winning arguments. What we're witnessing isn't just intellectual laziness, it is a profound shift in how we relate to knowledge itself. Truth has become less about correspondence with reality and more about alignment with identity. Ideas are judged not by their evidence or coherence, but by who promotes them and which tribe they serve. The consequences of this shift are far-reaching. When critical thinking declines, democracy weakens, for self-governance depends on an informed citizenry capable of evaluating complex issues. Innovation stalls because breakthrough thinking requires challenging established patterns. Most disturbingly, human autonomy diminishes as people become increasingly vulnerable to manipulation by corporations, political actors, and information systems designed to exploit cognitive weaknesses. The question we must confront is stark. Who benefits when populations stop thinking critically? What interests are served when citizens consume rather than contemplate, react rather than reflect? The answers reveal why reclaiming our cognitive independence isn't merely a personal development project, but a profound act of resistance. As we continue this exploration, we'll uncover the deeper systems perpetuating this crisis and the powerful forces that prefer a distracted, divided population to a thoughtful one. The battle for your attention is really a battle for your mind, and the stakes couldn't be higher. To understand why critical thinking is vanishing, we must examine the systems that shape our cognitive development, beginning with education. John Taylor Gatto, an award-winning teacher who became a fierce critic of conventional schooling, argued that modern education was never designed to create independent thinkers. In his controversial analysis, he claimed that compulsory schooling emerged during industrialization primarily to produce compliant workers and consumers, not enlightened citizens. The truth is that schools don't really teach anything except how to obey orders, Gatto wrote. After decades in the classroom, he observed how standardized education rewards conformity over creativity, memorization over understanding, and obedience over inquiry. From early childhood, students learn that success comes from providing expected answers rather than asking penetrating questions. Consider the typical classroom experience: predetermined curricula, standardized assessments, emphasis on correct answers rather than thoughtful processes. Students quickly learn that intellectual exploration carries risk while conformity brings rewards. By the time they reach adulthood, many have internalized a passive relationship to knowledge, waiting to be told what to think rather than developing the tools to think for themselves. This pattern extends beyond formal education, into workplace cultures, social environments, and media ecosystems. In professional settings, challenging established procedures or questioning leadership decisions often leads to being labeled difficult or not a team player. The social cost of independent thinking creates powerful incentives for intellectual conformity. The psychologist Eric Fromm identified this phenomenon in his landmark work Escape from Freedom, where he explored why many people willingly surrender their autonomy. Freedom of thought brings responsibility, the burden of forming one's own judgments, making difficult choices, and standing apart when necessary. This responsibility can feel overwhelming in a complex world, leading many to seek refuge in collective certainties and prepackaged worldviews. Many people are afraid to trust their own thinking. From observed, they feel safer as members of a group, conforming to its standards and beliefs, than they do exercising their own judgment. This psychological insight helps explain why critical thinking declines. Even as education levels rise, intellectual capacity alone doesn't guarantee the courage to use it. Social media has dramatically accelerated these tendencies. Platforms designed to maximize engagement have created environments where thoughtful discourse is nearly impossible. The architecture of these spaces rewards emotional reactions, tribal signaling, and simplified messaging while punishing nuance, uncertainty, and intellectual patience. Every aspect of these systems, from character limits to like buttons to algorithmic feeds, shapes how we process information. Content that provokes strong emotions, especially outrage, spreads faster than content that invites reflection. Algorithms detect and amplify divisive material because it generates more engagement. Users quickly learn that measured responses receive less feedback than passionate declarations, creating a feedback loop that degrades discourse. Media theorist Marshall McLuhan famously declared that the medium is the message, meaning that communication technologies shape thought independent of their content. Today's digital media environment encourages speed over depth, reaction over reflection, and certainty over curiosity. We consume information in ways that make critical evaluation nearly impossible, skimming headlines, absorbing fragments, and forming opinions before we've understood the issues. Even truth itself has been transformed. In an environment saturated with competing claims, many people have abandoned the pursuit of objective reality in favor of tribal epistemology, the belief that truth is whatever serves one's group interests. Facts become malleable, expertise becomes suspect, and consensus replaces verification as the standard for acceptance. This shift represents a profound crisis. When societies lose shared methods for determining truth, they lose the foundation for productive disagreement and collective problem solving. Democracy depends on citizens who can evaluate evidence, recognize fallacies, and revise views when warranted. Without these capacities, public discourse degenerates into power struggles between competing narratives, with volume replacing validity as the measure of success. So where do we begin to reclaim our cognitive independence? The first step is recognizing the forces that shape our thinking, the educational experiences that discouraged questioning, the social pressures that punish dissent, the media environments that fragment attention. Awareness of these influences doesn't eliminate them, but it creates space to resist their pull. Next comes the practice of asking better questions, not just about the world, but about our own thought processes. What assumptions underlie my beliefs? What evidence would change my mind? Whose interests are served by this narrative? What perspectives am I not considering? These questions activate the critical faculties that passive consumption allows to atrophy. The philosopher Socrates maintained that the unexamined life is not worth living. Today we might add that the unexamined thought is not worth thinking. Critical engagement requires intellectual humility, the recognition that our understanding is always incomplete, our perspectives limited, our certainties provisional. This humility isn't weakness but strength, the foundation for genuine learning and growth. In a culture that celebrates certainty and punishes doubt, maintaining this humility requires courage. It means risking being wrong, facing uncomfortable truths, and sometimes standing apart from consensus. It means valuing truth over tribal belonging and intellectual integrity over social approval. As we continue this exploration, we'll discover how the psychology of thinking shapes our vulnerability to manipulation, and how reclaiming our cognitive independence requires more than just intellectual skills. It demands emotional resilience, social courage, and a willingness to face uncertainty. The path ahead isn't easy, but it leads towards something precious, the freedom to think clearly in a world designed to cloud our judgment. The battle for critical thinking isn't just waged in classrooms or social media platforms, it unfolds within our own minds. Despite our self-image as rational beings, cognitive science reveals that human thinking is far more emotional, automatic, and socially influenced than we typically recognize. Understanding these psychological dynamics is essential for reclaiming our intellectual autonomy. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman revolutionized our understanding of thinking. With his research on dual processing systems, he identified two distinct modes of thought: System 1 fast, automatic, emotional, unconscious, and System 2 slow, deliberate, logical, conscious. While we pride ourselves on our rational capabilities, Kahneman demonstrated that most decisions emerge from the quick, intuitive System 1, with System 2 often serving merely to justify conclusions we've already reached. This cognitive architecture evolved for survival in simpler environments, where quick pattern recognition and emotional responses protected us from threats. But in today's complex information landscape, these same mechanisms leave us vulnerable to manipulation. Our brains instinctively seek cognitive shortcuts, simplifying complex issues, favoring familiar narratives, and accepting claims that align with existing beliefs while scrutinizing those that challenge them. Consider confirmation bias, our tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms pre-existing beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence. This isn't a failure of intelligence, but a feature of normal cognition. Even brilliant minds naturally filter reality through existing mental models, creating echo chambers within their own thinking. Reflect honestly. How often do you actively seek perspectives that challenge your worldview? How frequently do you change your mind based on new evidence? For most people, these experiences are rare not because they lack intelligence, but because human cognition naturally resists revision. Changing beliefs requires mental energy, creates psychological discomfort, and sometimes threatens social belonging. Group dynamics amplify these tendencies. Social psychologist Irving Janis coined the term groupthink to describe how the desire for harmony and conformity within groups can override critical evaluation. His research showed that even groups of highly intelligent individuals make catastrophic decisions when they prioritize consensus over critical analysis. This phenomenon appears across human history, from corporate disasters to political catastrophes to scientific errors that persisted for generations. Groups develop shared illusions of invulnerability, collective rationalizations, stereotyped views of outsiders, and pressure against dissenting viewpoints. Members self-censor doubts while convincing themselves that silence equals agreement, creating artificial consensus. These dynamics explain why organizational cultures often resist evidence that contradicts established practices, why political movements reject information that challenges their narratives, and why social groups punish members who question shared assumptions. The pressure toward conformity isn't just external, it operates within our own psychology, as we unconsciously align our perceptions with group expectations. Yet history's greatest advances have come from those who resisted these pressures, individuals who maintained independent thought despite social costs. Galileo challenging geocentrism, Darwin proposing evolution, Einstein reimagining physics, King confronting segregation all faced ridicule, rejection, and sometimes persecution for thinking beyond accepted boundaries. Their courage reminds us that progress depends on those willing to think independently even when it's uncomfortable. The modern information environment exploits these psychological vulnerabilities with unprecedented precision. Political messaging, advertising, and media content are increasingly designed based on psychological research, targeting emotional triggers and cognitive biases rather than rational faculties. Sophisticated persuasion techniques bypass critical thinking by activating System 1 responses: fear, tribal identity, moral outrage, while giving the illusion of reasoned choice. Digital platforms amplify these effects through algorithmic personalization, creating what researcher Eli Pariser called filter bubbles, information environments that reflect and reinforce existing beliefs while filtering out challenging perspectives. These systems don't just give us what we want, they shape what we want, narrowing perspectives while creating the illusion of comprehensive understanding. The result is a paradox: unprecedented access to information, alongside declining capacity for critical evaluation. We consume more content while understanding less, react more quickly while reflecting less deeply, and express stronger opinions with weaker foundations. The constant stream of stimulation leaves little space for the quiet contemplation, where genuine insight emerges. This brings us to perhaps the most significant psychological loss: the habit of inner dialogue. Ancient philosophers from diverse traditions emphasized the importance of self-examination, of questioning one's own assumptions and motivations. This internal conversation, thinking about our thinking, is the foundation of wisdom. Yet in today's externalized, performance-oriented culture, this practice has become increasingly rare. We've outsourced our thinking to external sources, to search engines that answer before we've fully formulated questions, to social media that provides ready-made opinions, to recommendation systems that predict desires before we've identified them ourselves. The result is a growing alienation from our own mental processes, a surrender of intellectual agency that happens so gradually we barely notice its loss. Reclaiming critical thinking begins with metacognition, becoming aware of our own thought processes. This means noticing when we're reacting rather than reflecting, when we're seeking confirmation rather than understanding, when we're adopting positions based on social alignment rather than reasoned evaluation. It means developing the capacity to pause between stimulus and response, creating space for genuine thought. Another essential practice is dialectical thinking, the ability to hold opposing ideas in mind simultaneously while exploring their relationships. This cognitive flexibility allows us to transcend binary thinking and engage with complexity. Rather than immediately judging ideas as right or wrong, we can examine their partial truths, contextual validity, and underlying assumptions. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti observed that to understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet. Still, this stillness increasingly rare in our hyperactive information environment is where deeper understanding emerges. Creating space for contemplation isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity for meaningful thought. Developing these capacities requires practice and discipline. It means reading deeply rather than skimming, listening to understand rather than to respond, seeking diverse perspectives rather than comfortable confirmation. It means cultivating intellectual humility, recognizing the limits of our knowledge and the fallibility of our reasoning. As we strengthen these mental habits, something remarkable happens. We begin to experience genuine intellectual freedom, not the shallow freedom of impulsive reaction or tribal alignment, but the deeper liberty that comes from thinking clearly, seeing through manipulation, and forming judgments based on evidence and values rather than social pressure.